So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander. I'm here on my own today, doing kind of a weird video because we did kind of a first impressions / initial review of Onto Richmond 2, but we just kind of talked about our thoughts and stuff, and we didn't take time to kind of show a teach of that because I wanted to kind of keep that in a separate video, partly because there's just so much to cover. I think it would end up being like incredibly long and maybe not as, I don't know, breaking up into parts might be a little bit more helpful for people where they can easily reference just this video. And then the other part of that is that I cannot reasonably like teach you how to play this game right now. And what I mean by that is that would take an unconscionably long time for you to be able to learn the rules from this kind of brief video explanation. Now, there are, and you should go and check out, a number of extremely good kind of learning step-by-step tutorials for the great campaigns of the American Civil War. So that's GCACW. The best ones that I've found, and the ones that I have used the most, are from Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials. And he is an aficionado of this game, and he has a lot of live full playthroughs broken down by some turns, but he also has a number of different kind of step-by-step, these are the rules, this is the introductory guide, this is how you play. If you want to learn kind of how to play, go and check that out. If you just want a better gauge of like what a game of GCACW kind of looks like, especially in the framework of Onto Richmond 2, that's kind of what this is going to be. Again, we're not going to point to and do a bunch of like examples and calculations and stuff, and I'm going to show you why as well, because we'd just be here for a very long time. But I wanted to show the whole of this board, and I couldn't even get it all in the camera shot reasonably. It's only 2 maps only. So you got this big old north map and you got this south map. And really what you can't see is, you can see a little bit of it down here, or up here, sorry. Yeah, there we go. There's a significant chunk of off-map turn tracks, charts, tables, and holding boxes. We'll take a closer look at those here in a little bit. But this is kind of the big playing area of what you have available to you. And you'll notice we have, it's the Peninsula campaign. This is the Peninsula, right? So most of the units here are focused right here. We have this big defensive line of fortifications that are being cobbled together. And then we have, over here we've got Richmond and we got Petersburg, I believe. Yep. And those are kind of the final objectives that we're working our way across the map to get to. But you'll notice, unlike a lot of other games out there on different periods, it's not like a whole line of guys across the whole board. The action is really focused where we have a whole line of guys across this small area. And that's what this game will look like to you. Onto Richmond 2, specifically the Peninsula campaign. Which is what we played. Or the Richmond campaign, is that what it's called? Yeah, I think that's the same thing. But we wanted to play the namesake, which is why I chose this one. And so this is it's Onto Richmond. Yeah, it is. It's Onto Richmond, the Peninsula campaign. That's what we played. But within this, you can do the historical setup, which is what we chose to do, because I'm a relative Civil War novice. Not relative, I am a Civil War novice. And so I wanted to kind of play what happened and what's the namesake of the box and kind of go with that. However, if you want to, there is a ton of different options where you can invade over here on the slightly more northern part. You can invade, I think, down here as well. You have a lot of different options that you can do to change up what the game looks like. And I say that just so that, there's so much content in this box, and they also give you historical things you can do to play the campaign if they had landed in a different area. So if you like this, you will never get tired of this. But what you're going to have is all these guys that are here are going to be over here. You don't get a bunch of extra dudes. The combats and the units in this, it looks like there's a lot of counters in the game, but the reality is the amount that you have on the board, it's not that much compared to a lot of other games. And each of them are divided up into formations, and they're marked by colors, and you have leaders, and they activate those guys within their little command ranges. Lots of very familiar kind of principles, but you're doing it at this really grand scale, right? It's called Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, and you do the whole campaign. And that's the one thing that really shone to me, is that you have this big old board, and you know the CSA player, they're literally entraining guys and running the steam trains all the way up here, dropping them off. You're marching guys out of Sussex after Norfolk was taken, and they're marching up here to go and defend Petersburg. It's not an area control game, but it kind of is. So the board is divided up by these red dotted lines and these dark names into different counties. So we've got Henrico County, Charles City County, New Kent, Hanover. Those are divided up by these red dotted lines, and you will take over those counties, generally speaking, by controlling the county seat, which is like the little county capital. Think about it that way, right? So the county house, with the courthouse and, you know, the county buildings, right? So there's some different stipulations. So some counties don't have that, but you control them in a different way, but the game will tell you how you do that. So what you're doing is you're moving and trying to take a county, trying to take a county towards your large objective at the end. And then part of that will also affect, especially on to Richmond 2, will affect your supply. The supply in this game, a significant amount of it is county-based, where if the Union controls a county, they can draw supply from that county or from a county that has an adjacent supply depot. And that's like a whole thing that you got to build all these depots, but the supply is done basically by county, effectively, is the way that you're measuring a lot of that. Oh, if I'm in this county, I either have to have a depot in the county, or I have to have a depot in the county next to it, right? Think about it that way. And so those county seats are often, and county control is often victory point related, but also supply related. And so the way that you think about a game, it's not just, oh, I got to go take that for the victory points. Well, if you take that for the victory points, it unlocks all this other space that I can kind of freely push forward to, and that the CSA has to then retreat out of, because in a few days, they will lose supply from that. And so the way that the strategic or the operational considerations play into this game are really, really something that I find to be very, very interesting. Beyond that, we have a number of different kind of larger scale things going on that are unique to this game. Some of those are off-map, which we'll kind of talk about, but a lot of them have to do with very specific different points on the map that will either provide or give some different benefits, or might have different stipulations about what you can and can't do with amphibious landing, and controls of the rivers. So, for example, early in the game, there's a couple points way up here on this side of the map, and you have to take those away, and once you do, you kind of control the flow of the river, or the traffic on the river, and what that does is that prevents the CSA from doing all these amphib transports, running guys down here to reinforce this area. It turns that tap off, and so that pivots the whole course and focus of the battle, as then they stop doing that and they pull back to a more defensible position. And I've never played a game system where the rules incentivized you to play the way that commanders historically did or do. And what I mean by that, we've played a lot of games, obviously, but every game that we play, it's quite often bring the forces together, one's trying to defeat the other, and you go, and one side breaks, and then they rout, and kind of the game's done. In a lot of games, that's kind of what we're looking at. But in this game, this is a game of time, and it is a game of managing your resources. Your resources in this case are typically your manpower. So what you'll have is we're going to move up, we're going to engage some units, do some skirmishes, maybe a battle here or there, but if things look precarious, I am incentivized to pull back and then reestablish a new line. And you're incentivized by that because if you lose control of that county seat and you lose supply, you have to get out. If you don't get out in time, like, you will start taking attritional losses, and that's very bad. You don't want to do that. And so the supply is one of those considerations, but also with the map being as big as it doesn't take much to have the threat of a little flanking force, and that threat is enough where you're like, we have to either break off guys to deal with that, which is going to weaken our line, or to just kind of pull back and make a more uniform line together so that we can't get outflanked by this. And there's so few games that give you this much space to play in, where, I'll be honest, as the Union player, I wasn't concerned about anything Middlesex North, but you better believe that I'm looking at all of this and all of this, even though all my troops are right here. And it was, what can I do? How quickly can I relieve my large forces holding these county seats with these kind of small little holding forces that they're supposed to be, right? So I've got my little 2 or 3 manpower guys to sit in Williamsburg so I can relieve Sedgwick, who's got 14 manpower, because he needs to go up and do the fighting. But I don't want to lose control of this, because I'll lose victory points and I'll start, puts me in a bit more of a precarious position depending on the time of the game. And so there's just so much to consider that works so well in this, at this scale. And I thought that was such a refreshing thing to see, that as you play this over the course of the game, you will see huge strategic shifts and operational shifts in, like, if the CSA lose Norfolk and the CSS Virginia, I think is what it is destroyed, cool, a boat got sunk. Well, what does that mean? Well, the CSS Virginia was doing a significant role of interdiction and holding both the James River and the York River. And if you lose that, then the James River is now something that the Union can freely kind of send their boats on. They can start doing amphib landings and transport, sending guys down here, sending guys up here, and all of a sudden you're threatened all the way up here, basically, when before you were just in a little land battle over here. And so even that strategic battle that's going on between the Union and the CSA that's off map is just so interesting, because so much hangs on it, and there's so many effects that happen once that happens. And yeah, that requires a lot of reference to the rules. It does. That's no mean thing. There's a lot of extra rules, and we spent a lot of time referencing those. But boy, is the gameplay worth it for me in this one. Honestly, it's one of the interesting things about this game system is that I think that the tactical part of the game is, like the actual battles where you roll dice, is one of the least important. And I don't want to say least interesting, but kind of. It's still interesting, but like, that's not where the game shines. The battles are, there's a bunch of different modifiers, and you roll some dice and you look up some results, right? At this scale, I'm less concerned most of the time about like the individual units and results. What I'm looking at is the aggregate of all the results of all my attacks on a broader front, and what that means, and then the movements in and around those things. Why we will not be going over some of the combats is, you will be, if you want to play this game, you will probably wish to invest in something like this, which is the kind of calculations sheet, which looks kind of crazy. This is not the craziest game that I've played that has these, but here's one that we've been using and filling out. And basically, you will go over these numbers, and you basically just, when you initiate any battle, you're going to go down the line and say, these are my strengths, here's my strengths with my artillery, here's my artillery, any modifiers, because, I've got numbers, then they go into ratios, and those ratios give you let me see if I've got that here. Do I have that? Yeah. Like, the ratio chart is based on the numbers of manpower, but then the ratio gives you a numerical DRM, right? And like, that's the case for artillery, it's the case for your leadership differences, your attack ratings, and things like that. there might be weather effects, there's terrain effects. You go through all of that, write it all down, you get to cumulative modifiers, and then, once you've done your cumulative modifiers, you actually roll the dice, add the values, and then you have the total difference, and the total difference might be +1, right? If you end up with a +1, you're going to look up how much manpower you've got, and you're going to look up at the +1 table, 1 big D, which means 1 loss, and big D I think is disorganized, and you get a bunch of fatigue. Not great. But if you've only got 4 to 6 guys, you just do a big D. That's it for the defender, and that's effectively what you're going with, where you're going to do a bunch of hits on people, looking for results. The more guys you have, the more guys you will lose. It's one of those games. If you have a big old army and you roll a big old result, a lot of times you're gonna, or you roll a small result, you're gonna incur lots of hits because you have lots of guys as well. Now that doesn't mean that you should only have small armies, but just know that your big numbers that you go in, those are going to whittle down pretty fast, and you might only do 1 loss to the opponent, but as you get down, from an 18 down to like a 10, they've gone from a 7 to a 0, where it's not necessarily an equal amount of hits. You might have taken more damage over the course, but then it would take so much more to get you down from your 10 to your 0. Just the way that the large armies, you kind of take more hits in a way. But yeah, what I mean when I say it's the least interesting part is that, like, it's fairly mathy, and you're just sat there and you're like, okay, it's this number, this modifier, this terrain, this weather, let's roll the result, hey, this is what happens, that's what happens. That's fine, but this isn't a tactical game. I'm not, where in something like a Combat Commander or a Last 100 Yards, the act of shooting and aiming is dynamic and like interesting, and that's kind of the thing in the game. Here, the strategic game is the thing in the game. We also have to roll our combats, but the combats, they give you results, and those results do have knock-on effects, but the beauty of the game is less in the combat and more in the overall strategic considerations. So that's kind of where I'm at with this game. Let me move the camera and we can have a quick little look at some of the other bits and pieces. Sorry, this is going to be a bit rough and ready. This is the turn track, and it's double layered, and it goes to a maximum of 112 turns, and it's very, very, very long. But there's a sequence of play, random events table, your end of action cycle rules, depending on different weathers and different postures, which is a whole union thing in this game, which is fun but frustrating at times. Then we have all of this over here. And these boxes are kind of the off-map holding boxes, and this is part of the joy of this game as well. So you have the whole wider war going on in the Shenandoah Valley, in Richmond. You've got Fort Monroe and Norfolk, which are just kind of off-map down here. You've got Fredericksburg and Baltimore and DC, and they all have different reinforcements that may or may not be coming on. And so during these kind of orange... what do they call these? That's a great strategic cycles on these kind of orange-brown turns. So at the end of every week, basically, you're going to do lots of rolling on here to either get reinforcements to come on the board or to try to invade Norfolk from Fort Monroe and resolve that. That might take you a week or two to siege that place. It can be pretty nasty. And depending on what happens, eventually you'll start bringing these units on the board following these arrows. So these guys in North Carolina and South Carolina, eventually they can come in down on SO42. I can't see it off. But like, it points to where they go, and they've got a little grid reference of where oh, it's all the way over here, isn't it? There you go. That's where it comes on. And the same thing up here with the guys who are released from the Shenandoah Valley, which, happens starting at turn 35 of 112 turns, right? And so all of this stuff is neat, and it's this extra little sideshow, but eventually this starts filtering onto the board. If Fort Monroe ever successfully takes Norfolk, which is what happened in this game, then all of the guys who survived from Norfolk, it won't be many, they run on the board as they're retreating away. The CSS Virginia gets destroyed if it isn't already, and then you get a bunch of Union guys who eventually can now start marching onto the board following this up. They're going to try to take Sussex County from these guys. They're going to march up to Petersburg. And all of a sudden, all these guys who thought, oh yeah, we're holding on nicely, well, you got a whole other front that opened up. So how quickly do you retreat here? Because you still have a lot of time that you need to hold out on. Again, it's all these different strategic considerations which I think are really, really, really interesting. The last thing that we'll talk about here is you kind of see what we got going on here already, but these sheets are you're kind of holding boxes for your units, and that's the one thing about this game that I think this is a fine solution. Takes up a lot of space because there's a lot of units in this game, but to reduce clutter on the board and your counter stacks from literally being this big, you're going to keep, for each unit on the board, they have a manpower strength, they'll have a fatigue level, and they have a space for any additional artillery that they may or may not have with them. That's a bit rarer, but why that's important is you're going to have some demoralized markers, potentially your disorganized or your organized side, your fatigue levels. These things change so frequently that if you have a stack of 3 or 4 units and they each have 3 markers each, your stack is now 12 guys, and you'll be moving and flipping 2/3 of those counters at the end of every turn, or every time they activate, you're adding fatigue. So it is wildly impractical. So you're going to print off these sheets, and at the time, the ones for Onto Richmond were not available, but a friend of ours had custom made them, so I think they're available now. I think they posted them on BGG, but these holding boxes are, frankly, indispensable. These ones are excellent because they're also color-coded, so we've got the yellow ones, we've got the green for DH Hills Division, red for AP Hills Division, just to help you, like, and they obviously match the counters on the board. That was something that was very, very helpful as well. And you'll notice we also had a couple of different cubes and tiddlywink markers just to help remind us, hey, these guys are locked until turn 50 or turn 35. Or the purple ones show that we had on the board. Let me show those again. The purple ones on the board, which are kind of all up here, those showed county control for the Union. Everything is CSA unless it's marked purple. And that's just a way, so it's an easy mnemonic so I can very quickly assess the board, which can be challenging if, for example, we're all on the county borders like this. It's like, oh, I can't remember. And like the county seats are hidden under units that have to occupy them for a lot of them. So little mnemonics like that will help the game get better. But I hope this gave you kind of a better overall grasp of what kind of a game this is. Again, to go through the rules, which are so long, they're well worth it, but they're very detailed and they're very dense. There's plenty of tutorials. Go watch Patrick's videos. They are incredibly helpful. But I hope this gave a bit of a broader sense of what we're looking for from this game and what it can offer you. Brilliant game. It's a masterpiece to me. The maps are great. It's really enjoyable to play. Takes a long time. It's an investment, but you know, if you are dedicated and you want to do this, it is well worth it. So thank you for sticking with me for this video. I hope this was helpful to people. If you have any interest in this series, pick one that you think is going to be good and that's available, and you're going to have a pretty good time with it. Oh, and one thing. This is 112 turns long. I talked about that earlier, but most of them are not. So I have Stonewall Jackson's Way. The longest campaign in that, I believe, is 15 turns. I think most of the other ones are smaller like that. I think that's this, Onto Richmond 2 is the biggest one, and there's another one that's massive as well, but most of them are not nearly as long as this. So just know that that's the case. But anyway, thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate you tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.